Question number 1. When is 10 Questions Season 2 available? The answer, right now. Hey everybody, it's Kyle Brandt. I'm the host on 10 Questions, and Season 2 is available now. We have all kinds of new tricks, all kinds of new contestants. You can also go back and check out Season 1. The Matthew McConaughey episode, the Aaron Rodgers episode, Paul Rudd, every episode. You can listen, you can watch. It is 10 Questions with Kyle Brandt exclusively on Spotify.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Today, I talk to my pal Mike Jones, now with USA Today after having covered this franchise for several years, of course, and also the host of the Football Jones podcast. Always has good guests on, so please check it out. We discussed his interview a little more than a month ago or so with Ron Rivera, more so from what Mike learned about him and how he compares to other coaches here in the recent past. We also discussed the Jay Gruden Storytime Tour. It was a good discussion of coaches we've covered in recent years. Plus, we talk about the free agent quarterback class and what might transpire. You can follow Mike on Twitter at @ByMikeJones and listen to him, as I said, on the Football Jones podcast. You can read my work on ESPN.com. I'll have a story up Friday about the Washington defensive front and how the organization needs to plan well for the future to keep as many of them around as possible. There are a lot of factors involved here, and I'll lay them out for you. Before I share my conversation with Mike, I just wanted to drop a couple things. We still don't know what's going to happen with Washington's quarterback situation. Those of you who are getting antsy, I'd suggest to quit checking social media every 15 minutes, expecting constant updates. This stuff takes a while and then can happen at any time. Many phone calls are made during this period, most of which we will never know took place. So there's a lot of uncertainty for everybody involved here. The teams don't know what's going to happen. I certainly don't know. I did talk to one person in the league who is familiar with both Sam Darnold and Marcus Mariota, wanted to get their opinion on these guys. Wasn't wowed by Darnold, felt his processing speed was slower than he'd like, and didn't think he'd become a Ryan Tannehill reclamation project. Again, I know others who really liked him coming out of that draft and still do. They felt like Washington, that he'd be a good fit for Washington. But it does highlight how split the opinion is. So if you do trade for him, you really have to like him, knowing the money coming due and what the compensation might be. When I watched some of his games, there were plays I said, wow, that's just an athletic play. Some plays he made against the Rams I thought were terrific. Other times it felt like he was good only if his first read was there. But I didn't see a lot of the progressions. I saw him make some throws that Rich Cimini talked about on a previous podcast where you felt like he didn't see all the defenders and it got him into trouble. So we'll see. He's only 23. This person I talked to worried a bit on both quarterbacks' understanding of situational football and to what degree they could excel in that area. He did like Mariota in an offense that uses his legs, whether it's a Shanahan-style attack with boots and RPOs, and that's something Washington could certainly use. Didn't think Mariota could raise the level of those around him. I think you probably would agree with that. I think most people would. Few quarterbacks do. It's why you need to keep building. Anyways, just one opinion. And nobody I've talked to believes you'd have to give up more than a 4 for Mariota. That might be high given his contract ends after this year. And it can go from being an certainly affordable starter at $10.6 million to double that amount. Now, what are you getting for that? And if it's only a 1-year deal, that's a lot. So, it's not going to take a lot to get him. Then the Raiders have to decide what they want to accept, if they want to trade him. Anyways, you can check out my Instagram account for a deeper explanation of his contract. Again, that's John Keim, ESPN. I still think Alex Smith's future is certainly on the table still, and I think it's safe to say that he wants to come back. It's kind of odd how nothing has really come out. My gut tells me that he'll be elsewhere. It wouldn't shock me if he wanted to go elsewhere. I don't know that at all to be true, but when you look back on the year and how Ron Rivera even said at one point they would have had the same record or had the same production if Kyle Allen had started, and you're Alex Smith, what are you going to think? And I think there were a couple things that you think back to how hard he had to fight to even get on the roster and not go on IR. And so you just wonder about some of that sometimes. And does that add up for him? He knows they're looking for someone else. So like I said, I don't know if he wants to come back here or not. I'm just looking at this, trying to analyze the situation. And, the organization is still looking at other people. And I wonder if he's not doing the same and wondering if he'd, like to be elsewhere. It's not necessarily up to him, but I think but it wouldn't surprise me. And I don't know that he would ever say anything. And I bet you these guys would never say anything either. I think they have a healthy respect for each side. But it just, again, I don't know if it's true. I just think it adds up a little bit. And he would still be viewed as a backup elsewhere based on what I've heard from a few people in the league. What does all this mean? I don't know yet. I just know Washington's search will continue. And clearly it seems like they would like to move on. And it wouldn't shock me if Smith did too, but don't know. So, but that's just a little bit of a reading, I don't know about tea leaves, but just kind of looking at the situation and wondering more so than anything else. So don't take that as not a report, it's just a wondering, etc. One note, teams can start placing the franchise tag on players starting on February 23rd. The one obviously here who would be in line for something like that could be in line is Brandon Sheriff. He played on the tag last year. Now, if he gets paid in a deal, it better average at least $15 million per year because that would make him top of the guard money. It may be even more than that because that's just how this game works. However, because he counted $15.03 million in the tag last year, if he doesn't sign and he gets tagged again, he's going to make $18.03 million this year, and then hit free agency next year when he'll get a really good deal again, unless he has some catastrophic injury. Even if he had an injury that ended his season but could play the following year, he's still going to get paid. I also never heard him be more effusive in his desire to stay than when he was after the season ended. The question will be, is it on the tag or with a long-term deal? But as with Kirk Cousins, the cost of the tag will always be a sticking point for those willing to hold their ground on their value and go on those one-year deals. Another note on Ronald Darby. I was talking to a defensive coach in the NFL and asked him about the corner market and Darby in particular. He liked Darby, considered him a strong number 2 corner. I think he still has some concerns about the durability, even though he got through this year healthy. But he said the corner market is weak, so he wondered if someone would overpay simply because there aren't many good corners available. I know there hasn't been any movement on a deal with Darby here unless it's happened in the last day or so. Both sides have expressed a desire to continue this relationship, but it's possible Darby could wait just to see his market value, or at least get through the combine period where teams start talking to agents and get a feel for it then, and then maybe something happens. That's usually in the early part of the combine is when agents start to gauge the market value of their clients, and I think that could determine when if anything gets done and when. I still think his injury past will impact his contract, and I think that he'll return here. I've talked to several agents who predict a lot of one-year deals this year in free agency because of the lower cap number and that it will go higher next year. I did have one agent who suggested teams should think about 2 or 3 year deals because you could probably get them at a bargain in the second year, or more of a bargain. It protects the team knowing the cap will go up, and it provides the player some security. Don't know if that'll happen, but it was one agent's thought. Anyway, that's it from me. After this break, I'll be back with Mike Jones. What is the biggest thing he learned about Ron Rivera, and what does it mean for this team's future?
Introducing the new Verizon Business Unlimited plans. Now you can pick a plan for as low as $30 a month per line with AutoPay. Get 5G nationwide, plus massive data capacity, plus spam blocking features. And with Verizon Business Unlimited, you can mix and match the right plans for your business so you get more of what you need and none of what you don't. From Verizon, the network businesses rely on. 5G nationwide, available in 1,800 plus cities on most VZ 5G devices. Monthly per line pricing with 5 plus lines on Biz Unlimited Start. Device payment, smartphone purchase. AutoPay and paper-free billing required. Terms apply.
Support for this podcast comes from McDonald's. What does a Sprite from McDonald's taste like? Many say it's electrifying. Others believe that refreshing first sip is the best part. But don't take our word for it. Let your taste buds make their own assessment. Get any size soft drink for only $1 on the McDonald's $1, $2, $3 menu. Go ahead, try a spicy Sprite, or enjoy a Coke, Diet Coke, Fanta, or Dr. Pepper. Prices and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any offer or combo meal.
Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with USA Today's Mike Jones. All right, Mike, before we get into the heavy topics, I want to talk about Ron Rivera, quarterbacks, Jay's Storytime Tour and all that. The most important thing to ask, though, is the smoking. have you settled on a smoker yet?
I have not yet. I am looking because, look, new off season. It's cold, and I'm doing my research because I got to get something better because I can't, it's been so cold. I haven't been able to smoke anything, but I've been looking. I might go with this Masterbuilt, but it's a charcoal. But you can load up the charcoal basket, and it'll cook. You set the timer. It's digital. I might go with that because I've just been using my Weber charcoal, and also it's single walled. So in this cold, I need something that's double walled that'll be better insulated.
Yeah.
So I have not totally. I'm doing my research right now.
It is.
So I saw you had pictures of you were smoking in the snow. I bet you probably had to go out there. I would have had to go out there every 20 minutes.
Every 30 minutes for about, I think it took about 8 hours or so. But it was I was going outside about every 30 minutes. Now, if I had worn one of those Fitbit watches, I probably got my 10,000 steps just going in and out, in and out, in and out. Anyway, I guess we got to talk football now. So I wanted to go back to you had the interview with Ron Rivera, and this was like at the end of the season.
Right.
But I want to use that because it was a really good interview, but it also, you were able to gain some insight into him, and you've covered other coaches here when you were a beat writer covering this franchise. I'm curious what your takeaway is from just much more so about what you learned about him and his style compared to some of the other coaches here that you have covered.
I learned, what I gathered from him was just the reason why that team was able to be resilient. It does start at the top. And if you've got kind of a nonchalant kind of guy that's not as dialed in at times as maybe he should be, the team's going to be kind of flaky. If you, but you've got a guy here who was really resilient and determined, and that's why that team fed off of him. I didn't understand his decision 4 weeks into the season to bench Haskins. I was critical of it. I thought it was silly that he was talking about chasing division. I was like, there's no way he believes this. He's just trying to get his guys. But he's an eternal optimist.
Right.
And I learned that when he talked about lessons from his dad and from his mom, and just the way they continued to teach them to just keep plugging along with things. And I said, oh, he actually legitimately did believe this. And then the stories he told about when he was an assistant with Andy Reid, when Andy Reid was like, look, like your grades are way higher than everybody else. And he was like, well, I think theirs are too low. Instead of, as a young guy kind of questioning himself and being like, oh, coach, maybe you're right. He was just very confident that, well, no, like I'm looking at this as the best that these guys could be, and this is how I assess it. And so he looked at his roster here in Washington and was like, okay, if everything goes right, like I believe this and this could happen, this would align. This is how we could finish. And so it made all the sense in the world that they were able to pull off what they were because of who their tone setter was.
And it's funny because like there were a lot of parts of the interview. I think that's the part where I enjoyed the most was how you went down that road with the optimism part, because I think it explains why he can take on some of these challenges and feel like he can succeed. Now, I think there's sometimes a flip side to that optimism that do you maybe sometimes see things differently than it needs to be?
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? I mean,
right, yeah.
Is there a flip side, you think?
I mean, I do think there is. I mean, I think that you can be guilty of over-evaluating or overestimating some things and thinking, that a team is better than it is. I mean, I know there are plenty of times. I mean, how many times do we hear Bruce Allen say we're close when they weren't really close?
Right.
So, yeah, there is a danger of falling too much in love with what you've got going or thinking, oh, we don't need to really make a lot of changes. Let's just stick with this here. We'll be okay. But I do think that we saw from Ron that, okay, if you're doing A, B, and C, I'm going to continue to be optimistic. If you're going to, mess around, because that was the really damning thing I thought for Dwayne Haskins. I'm like, this guy believes in everybody. He's always finding a silver lining with anything that he possibly can. And if he's done with you, dude, like
Right.
That was bad. Now I'm not saying Dwayne Haskins won't ever be anything in the NFL, but for here, that chapter was closed. So I think that Ron does have the balance that he needs to, because otherwise he would have continued to look at Haskins and be like, well, he didn't throw any interceptions there. So there's the good, but he does have standards.
Right. And I think that's a big key. And I think standards is I think that was a big word out there this year. I think consistent messaging was another thing you heard from players and from others in the organization, which is something I think that had been lacking for a while. So I agree with you. I think he's got that balance. Compared to, like, how does it compare to, you covered what? You were here for Shanahan. Were you here for Zorn at all?
No, I was not. So it was Shanahan. I started when Shanahan started.
Okay, yeah. You missed a doozy. But so, like, how do you feel like and I know you weren't out here every day, but you did deal with him. How do you feel like, his messaging and dealing with, not just so much dealing with him, but what you heard from him compared to a Shanahan and a Gruden?
Well, as far as a Shanahan goes, I think that there was so much bull crap going on. Upstairs, headbanging between Dan and Bruce and Shanahan, that clouded a lot of stuff. I know guys really liked playing for Mike. Now he was very much in a lot of ways my way or the highway. But guys felt like he was fair. There was just, again, if they didn't have the whole tug of war over the quarterbacks, whether it was McNabb and between, that being forced on him and him relenting on that, or the Robert Griffin drama and stuff, who knows how much longer he could have been here. Maybe he would have been able to build something here. But I feel like as far as in the locker room, Mike was respected. Ron has a different style than that. I think that as a former player, guys feel like they can identify with him a little more. I did feel like sometimes players almost had a almost like Shanahan was the dad. Like, you don't want to get in trouble.
Right.
But Ron, I felt like guys felt like they could connect with him because he had been there in their shoes. Now, Mike had street cred from being a 2-time Super Bowl winning head coach. But I mean, I remember just times that guys were like, afraid to say stuff like, oh, Coach Shanahan might get mad. I mean, that was a response,
Yeah.
I mean, so
that happened more than a few times you heard that.
Hey, how's your ankle? Ooh, coach doesn't like to talk about injuries. Wasn't that Ryan Terrain? Coach don't like to talk about injuries. Coach don't like to talk about injuries. Yeah. And he wasn't the only one, but that was like his answer to 3 straight questions.
Yeah.
Instead of just, hey, I'm feeling okay. But guys were scared in a way. I didn't get the sense that guys were scared. I felt like guys wanted to play for Ron and didn't want to let him down. Not like they were afraid of getting punished.
And then that's true. And, I guess, especially compared to Jay coming off that. And I know, like, that whole situation became chaotic because of all the stuff going on in the organization.
Yeah. And also I felt like with Jay, I mean, he was a laid back kind of guy, but sometimes I felt like he was too laid back. And then when he would try to get tough, guys, it wasn't consistent, Right. But I think that Ron is consistent, and guys know what they're getting from him, and he wants everyone to work hard. He expects this, and there's no questioning how much time and commitment he's putting into the job, which was sometimes the question with Jay. And if your players are wondering how much the head coach is putting in, you're not going to get a lot of effort coming from them. I didn't hear anybody questioning Ron on his effort and his expectations, and the preparedness like we did with Jay from veteran guys on, the team wasn't being pushed as hard as it could be like that. So that was
the lack of urgency stood out to more than a few.
Right.
Yeah. And I agree with that too. And I think, when you see a guy go through what Rivera went through this season, I think it does translate into guys saying, oh, this guy's going through this. But I think they would have seen. I don't think that changed Rivera's approach. I think. I mean, and whether or not he becomes the greatest, we're not saying he's the greatest coach. We're just looking at the differences here and what has made him a coach in the NFL who has had some success. And he's had some years where they haven't had success. But there is a reason why somebody's in that spot. And one of the differences, I think, is that consistency. And players saw it too. You'd hear it from guys like McLaurin and all that. And the other thing is you draft guys like that, like McLaurin, Chase Young, and they become culture changers as well for you. And they heed your message, and then they spread the gospel of whatever throughout the locker room. And that's a big deal too. Yeah,
and I don't know that we could ever really say what Jay's gospel was.
I don't think
you knew what Mike's was. I don't know if we ever really knew what Jay's was. And you know what Ron's is. So not having the questions there just makes it different. But, I mean, again, there are guys who love Jay. I mean, Jay is a very talented offensive coordinator.
Smart guy.
Smart football mind. Not everybody's meant to be a head coach. Right. And I'm not saying that Jay will never be a good head coach, but at the time, this just wasn't the best, outcome and results for him.
And I think sometimes guys have to be in the right situation for them. It's like when Steve Spurrier is here, he had no chance here.
Yeah.
He may have had a better chance somewhere else where they were able to say, you can't do this, or you have to do this, and adhere to that.
Right.
But Jay has been on a little story time tour lately, and it's kind of entertaining, but I think there's also the question of like, okay, what if some of those players went on those story time tours as well?
Oh, for sure. I mean, guys would definitely have stories to tell because we've heard them. We've heard them, we've seen them, and it's interesting that time always kind of makes things a little bit different, or people remember things a little differently, or kind of history changes a little bit.
Yeah, and it's right, and that's certainly not a knock on him. I think Jay Gruden can be an entertaining guy. I mean, I think if he went on to, I know he's in talks with to possibly do some games this year, or at least work with a network, I think he would be entertaining. Because as we've seen, he's not afraid to say some things, and he will share some insight. And I think he is a smart guy, and I think he could do well. How well he do, I don't know, but I think he'd be entertaining in a booth.
Yeah. Oh no, he definitely would be, because he's a great guy to shoot the breeze with.
Yeah.
And there were times, whether at the combine or some of those events where it's off season, good talk. And there are times in the hallway. When you're sitting down talking for a story, he was, very good.
He was.
So great as far as that goes. Insightful again, not a dumb guy, a smart guy.
Not at all.
But again, he probably needed a team that had a lot of strong veterans. Maybe an enforcer of a defensive coordinator or top assistant. Some extra elements that he just didn't have here.
And I think the enforcer is a good one too. And I think that's where the D coordinator would have come in. And I do think, like, even with Rivera, I don't know that he's not a big gruff guy where it's like, oh my God. I think Del Rio is more that guy for them. And I think Rivera is a guy that players know they can go talk to and deal with. And I don't want to say they don't have fear of him.
No.
But I think it's more like, and I don't think he's necessarily like, the good ship lollipop here, but I do think having Del Rio is going to be a guy who's a little bit more stern with, I think.
Right.
And with Jay, he really didn't have that, I think you're right. I think he did need that.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't going to be Hazlitt. It definitely wasn't Joe Barry, and it wasn't, Minuski.
Right.
He just didn't have that guy. He probably and look, even like Spurrier had Marvin Lewis.
Marvin ran Marvin ran that ship here.
Yeah, but Jay didn't have that.
Right.
But you're right. In former players in Carolina, right after Ron had been hired, I talked to them, and a lot of them described him as more like a CEO kind of guy.
Yes,
very good at delegating to his coaches, but also a father figure type guy. And Thomas Davis talked about, him being a father figure kind of guy. And that's why he wanted to finish out his career playing for him. So he kind of strikes the balance. And like you said, Del Rio is that, that fiery guy, so it works that way.
Yeah. But it's funny because Marvin ran the show when Spurrier was here he would come up with the practice schedule. He would schedule out those days or help him with that. And that was good training for Marvin to become a head coach, because that's essentially what he was. And Spurrier wanted to see what his offense could do. And I think Jay obviously likes offense, but I do like, you're right with Rivera. And I think that's one reason why this team didn't fold when he was going through those treatments, because you look at how much time he missed here. And, and I wrote a big story on it. He talked about this with you on your podcast, and I would tell people, go back and listen to that, because it is very revealing on Rivera's philosophies too, I believe. But the whole cancer thing, like if you don't have guys you can trust around you who can run their sides of the ball, et cetera, this team didn't have a chance, because he was missing too much time. Yeah. And he would have had to taken some time away, but because there was a setup the way it was, and when he was in Carolina, where he felt it was best when he had those coordinators that he knew he could trust, whether it was Wilkes or McDermott, those guys, like that's when he could when he didn't have that and he had to get more involved, it was tough for him. So he needs those guys, because he wants to, the way his style is to be involved in other, and just take care of a lot of other things, but also, the relationships with players is important to him. And so that's what I think his strength is with this.
Right. So, and that's also why we saw a number of players have said that when he was done with the cancer treatments, that's when we saw him able to lock in more, and the results also began to speak for themselves in an improved way, because he was able to be involved in a lot of different areas and be that tone setter and demand a lot from them.
Yep. And I remember talking to Chase Rouillet near the end of the year about that. He's like, when you started hearing him involved, like they're out in there in the blocking sled drills and all that, and you started to hear his voice, he said, like, he may have been yelling at them. They were smiling because he was there doing it again, and he had that energy again. So anyway, I want to shift to quarterbacks for a few minutes and go, like, you look at this quarterback carousel, all these names being bandied about. What do you think who realistically do you think will get moved in all of this?
Carson Wentz will get moved. And we've been talking, it's been out for weeks, so it's about to happen. It's going to happen really soon. We don't know exactly when it's going to happen, and we don't know when exactly where. We know it seems to make the most sense that it's Indianapolis because of Frank Wright, or that it's Chicago because of John DeFilippo. But we don't know for sure. But he's going to be moved. We know that there. Another guy, Sam Darnold, could wind up getting moved. Whether or not the Jets are able to get Deshaun Watson, or whether or not they just use that pick on a Zach Wilson or something like that. But I think that we will see Darnold moved somewhere. I'm not so sure that Deshaun Watson gets moved. Every day I'm checking with people, and there's a number of people who feel like, he really just doesn't have the leverage that you might think that he would have. He just signed that contract. They don't have to, they can be like, yo, do you want to get paid? Then show up. The reason why Nick Caserio came here is because he wanted to build a team around Deshaun Watson. So don't be so sure that he's going to get moved there. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting. There's still a lot of time that franchise is a train wreck, but doesn't mean he's going to get moved.
What do you think Marcus Mariota's market would be? Because he's got that crazy contract with all those escalator clauses. And I'm, people want to go to my Instagram page. I broke it all down there. It's John Keim, ESPN. But if you want to go there, it's all broken down there, just how it is and how it goes up. He could end up making 18, 20 million by being an average starter.
Right.
What do you think his market is?
Well, I think that if you're one of these teams that wanted a Wentz, or, couldn't get Darnold in a trade or whatever, then maybe you look at Mariota, because he is a guy that's got talent. He does have experience. Washington, that might be a spot where maybe he's a good bridge guy for you. You can compete right now while you draft a guy in the second or third round, or, that can sit for a little bit, who isn't ready to be a difference maker right now. So I wouldn't be surprised if Mariota goes somewhere, although, you never know. You hear some stuff that maybe Carr would be, but then you hear that no, Carr isn't going anywhere. We do know that Mike Mayock really likes Mariota, but for the right price, and they love draft picks too. So for the right price, maybe they could. Teddy Bridgewater is another interesting one because it seems like the Panthers would like to move him there. Does he wind up, being another guy that is a squad that needs a veteran guy to hold a spot while they develop another guy? So I think those two would be really intriguing to find out what happens with them.
What about Jameis? Because, my understanding is that he liked his setup in New Orleans.
Right.
And my guess is he would probably like to stay there if he could. What do you think happens with him?
I think more likely he stays there. Sean Payton said it at the end of the year that they like what they had in him, but that he also didn't have an off-season program, didn't have a regular preseason, but that throughout the regular season, he was able to learn that system more. So I think that that's a good possibility that he could wind up staying there. It's a guy that, look, he's got a big arm. He can throw for a lot of yards. He can throw a lot of touchdowns, threw a whole lot of interceptions too, but he went to New Orleans because he wanted to learn. He called that, the learning spot. What do you call it? Like a Harvard of quarterback school or whatever. So just because he threw a ton of interceptions there in Tampa doesn't mean that he can't have learned something from watching, so.
He also was playing, and I don't want to make excuses for him because you make a bad throw and you make a bad throw, and I didn't watch all those picks, but I know the reputation of that offense with Bruce Arians is a lot of picks. And right. Tom Brady was throwing a lot of picks, or more picks than he normally had early in the year. And it wasn't until he more or less gained control of the offense with he and Byron that right. It started to change for them. So I don't want to dismiss the theory that maybe that system wasn't good for Jameis Winston. And maybe right. You need to be in a situation where you are like, you have more of the ability to check down a little bit to, and not have to force things if that's what he was doing. So, but I don't think he's going to be available for this team because my sense has been that New Orleans would want to keep him.
Yeah. I mean, even if he's just an insurance policy, why they see, what they have with Taysom Hill some more or draft. But again, yeah, you got to be, yes, Bruce Arians' philosophy is no risk it, no biscuit. But sometimes Jameis Winston took that a little too literally, so, but again, having to sit back and learn probably helped him some. I don't think the book is closed on him. But,
yeah, I mean, a guy who throws that many touchdowns, he's going to get more chances. And to see if it was it just this, or was it that, or was it you? And so we'll go from there. With Darnold, the last one on him is that it is interesting with him because I've talked to people who really like him, who liked him coming out. And they would tell me like, oh, that's the guy you got to go get if you're Washington. And right. Then I talked to Rich Cimini, our guy from who covers the Jets, and he was a little bit down on him, or I just felt like he could be maybe an average guy and I was talking to somebody yesterday too about this, just like their thoughts on him. They weren't as sold on him, maybe going somewhere to become anything more than what he is, because it's maybe the processing speed isn't there. Maybe he gets locked on that first target. If you take that away, then he's in a little bit more trouble.
I don't know, man. I just still look at who he had as his coach. I mean, Jay Cutler told someone very close to him that Adam Gase was the worst coach that he had ever had. So I wouldn't totally kill Sam Darnold. I would like to see him somewhere. I think that he was talented enough. People who were familiar with him, had worked with him in the offseason, were high enough on him that I think that he had ability. And I think in the right situation, he can grow and continue to learn. If he's got a good quarterback coach, he's got a good supporting cast. I mean, again, you got to consider who he was working with.
I think I believe I would take a shot at him. The part that would give me pause is that contract, where he's at in his contract. That's the hard part. And then it's like, what's the compensation to get that? That would be another hard part. But he is only 23.
Right.
So, and I know that, like I said, there are people, and I was talking to Coach yesterday who was not as high on him as maybe he was on some others. And I do think you take into account what you say. It's more or less like, what would you be willing to give up to get him?
Right.
Knowing what he's going to cost, he's going to come into the option year next year. And so that's the hard part for me, is like, what would you be willing to give?
But the good thing is okay. You do have that year to make the decision on, and look, if you can get this guy, which was, a top 5 pick, and I mean, how does he compare to the guys coming out of the draft where you're going to be able to draft? You're not going to be able to get somebody. Now, some people say that Zach Wilson is rated higher now than what Sam Darnold was coming out. I don't know if that's true. I've heard that, but I haven't heard a whole lot of people say that. But, okay, say you've got the 15th pick or whatever. Are you going to get a quarterback that's rated as highly as Sam Darnold is? So then maybe it's worth it because, yes, you got to make the decision, but you can still, that 5th-year option, how's it compare if you're going to have to wind up signing some other veteran quarterback on the free agent market? I just think that, again, he's too talented to not take a flyer on him. Still draft somebody in the 2nd or 3rd round as a good insurance policy and developmental guy. But I think he makes a lot of sense.
I think that, like I said, it always depends on what's the cost to get him. And I will be honest, like if a team gives up a 1st-round pick for him, they already liked him. They already saw what they want to see, and they're gonna say a lot of it was Gase. I love this guy coming out. I can do this with him in this offense, and so you'll probably extend him in that situation. That's why I think like it would be hard. While someone might say I wouldn't give up a 3rd for him, well, that's fine. Then you probably wouldn't get him because why would the Jets trade him for that? But it also tells me you're not sold on him, and if you're not sold, you probably don't do that deal.
Yeah, no, so, you're not throwing away a 1st round.
No, and that's why I think like so if you like him, then you're going to take a shot, and I don't know. I think he's a tricky one because there are some things that you'd see that's like, okay, that's good, and some things you see like that's not good. Is that coaching? Is that on him? Is it on the talent around him? A mixture of all of that, and he's only 23. So, but, and the other thing is like, so I don't know, we'll see, but I think he'll be an interesting one to watch because of his status. And like Mariota will be, but I don't think you're going to have to give up nearly as much to get him as you would to get Darnold.
No. And you never know. Mariota could wind up pulling a Ryan Tannehill, just so it could wind up being a bargain there. But again, you got to have the right setup, a strong run game, a good defense, a good offensive line, there's a lot of reasons why Ryan Tannehill, it's worked out there because there's a lot of good around him.
Last thing, Mike, experienced front office, and they hired Chris Polian. They've got Martin Mayhew, Marty Herney. What benefit is that, do you think, to this team?
Well, it sounds like a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but I'm not sold on any one of those guys as a GM by themselves, but I think that collectively their experience and their knowledge could be a good thing. I think it's great because Ron Rivera does not have to be as involved in personnel stuff because he's got one guy he's worked with before that he trusts, another guy that he had some interest in at his previous stop, didn't wind up hiring. And then you've got Polian as well. You've just got a very veteran group there. If those guys can all work with respect for each other and share the input and things like that, it could wind up being a good thing. You just don't know, okay, will it be a lot of headbutting? But all of those guys signed on for a reason. If Martin Mayhew was worried about Marty Herney, if Polian was worried about coming in with Mayhew and Herney, I don't think he would have been here. But, and I don't think that Mayhew would have left the 49ers, which is a good situation, to come here if he didn't feel like he could have success here.
Yeah, and I think my last word on that too would be it's almost like an NBA team where you have a bunch of good players around you. Who's taking that final shot?
Right.
Rivera has the power to say, we're taking this guy, we're not taking this guy. but, he also likes to go by a lot of opinions too.
Right.
So is there someone who's going to say, we can't take this guy or we need to take this guy? That'll be the interesting thing to watch there too, but we don't know. We'll see how it plays out. Hey, Mike, thank you so much. I kept you longer than I wanted, but it was a great chat. And I do encourage people to listen to the Football Jones podcast. Go back, especially when listening to the Ron Rivera one, and then listen to it because you always have good guests on there.
I appreciate you having me, man. Always good catching up with you.
We want the best of both worlds. We want a hybrid. A smarter hybrid cloud approach with IBM helps retailers manage supply chains with Watson AI while predicting demands with ease. The world is going hybrid with IBM. Visit ibm.com/hybrid cloud.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Mike for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back with another episode Monday. I'm interviewing a guest Monday morning, so it'll likely be out late Monday morning or so. Talk to you next time.